Oh, hey there. Lately, I've been on this huge Mega Man kick. It's a series that I grew up with, but I've never gotten tired of. Whether it's the classic series, X, Zero, ZX, Legends, Battle Network, or even Star Force, I love them all. There's just something so inherently fun about Mega Man that not many other series, Castlevania excluded of course, can accomplish. We live in an age where we see ideas recycled over and over again, almost ad nauseum. And yet, for a time, that was basically the entire foundation of the Mega Man series. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. To really cover the series, we have to start at the beginning. That's right, this is just another video about Mega Man. Like, the game, not the series. Like the first game in the series. Okay, just play the intro thing, future editor me. Now this is a game with some serious history. Even if you, viewer who watches video game content on YouTube, miraculously, in this day and age, still hadn't heard of Mega Man, well, that's impressive for one, but you've at least heard of Capcom. And if not, don't worry, because I'm a guy talking to a camera, meaning I'm going to tell you all about them. Capcom was established in 1983, which just so happened to be the same year that the Famicom debuted in Japan. So it only made sense that they hit the ground running, bust out Mega Man, taking the world by storm, and forever changing the landscape of video games. Except, that's not what happened. They took one look at the NES and said that it was too difficult to develop high-quality arcade-level content for. Instead, they turned their attention toward developing arcade games, using their proprietary CP system circuit boards. And in 1984, they released their first arcade game, Vulgus, which was a scrolling shooter in the same vein as the 1982 game Xevious. Something to keep in mind is that when it came to the 1980s, they were like the Wild West when it came to video games. There were hardly any rules, everybody was copying everybody else, to the point where it's shocking that there weren't more plagiarism lawsuits being thrown around left and right, and the home console market was completely flooded. In fact, it's pretty impressive that Capcom even survived, considering the fact they launched their company in the same year as the video game crash of 1983, and the first game they decided to release was a game that was essentially a reskin of a game that had come out 2 years prior. But you know, innovation isn't the only key to success. Sometimes you just need to be consistent. So in 1985, Capcom dipped their toe into the home console market and gifted the world with 1942, a scrolling shooter in the same vein as 1982's Xevious. Well, they certainly had the consistent part down. But how about innovation? Clearly someone at Capcom was thinking the same thing, because they decided to bring in fresh young talent to design a game specifically for the home console market in Japan. It was a small team of 6, including an artist by the name of Keiji Inafune. You know, the world-renowned creator of Mighty No. 9? I'm sorry. He designed pretty much all of the enemies, the Japanese logo, and the box art. In fact, not only did he make a majority of the art designs, but he also converted most of those into sprites as well. Which for those of you who don't know, is pretty damn impressive and definitely not the standard nowadays. Typically, there's all sorts of different artists that make games. The artists that focus on sprites or 3D models aren't always the same artists that drew and created the character designs. The jobs have become a lot more specialized. But again, this was the 80s, so there wasn't really a standard for game development yet. The design of Mega Man was inspired off the titular manga character Astro Boy, which when you look at this sprite here, becomes very apparent. Also, just to get this out of the way, I know I've been saying Mega Man this entire time, but in Japan, the character and series as a whole is called Rockman. When the game was localized, it was changed to Mega Man, which, when you think about it, just kind of makes sense anyway. There's a bit of a music theme to some of the characters' names in these games, which we'll get to later. But that aside, when the game has a bunch of elemental-themed bosses, the name Rockman makes you think of someone like this. You know, the guy who chucks rocks? But regardless, I think the name Mega Man just sort of works. He's a robot that can do it all, so you know, he's Mega. As for the music, that credit goes to Manami Masume. In the future, she did work with another composer on Mega Man 2's soundtrack, and even wrote the Nitro Man theme for Mega Man 10, but outside of those, she wasn't heavily involved in Mega Man past this point. While I personally think that the first Mega Man has some of the weaker tracks in the series, she really laid the groundwork for how the series is going to sound in the future, which is really impressive. Mega Man was released in 1987 in the US and in Japan, and in 1989 in Europe. As for the reception, it's kinda all over the place. The Capcom sales team actually didn't think it was gonna sell, but apparently it sold well enough to get localized overseas. The localization was famously rushed, which led to the all too well known American box art. Now, supposedly, this was actually drawn in the span of 6 hours, which if you ask me is pretty impressive, because in all honesty, I could not draw this in 6 hours. But here's the thing, everybody knows about this box art. It's super famous with how ridiculous Mega Man looks, and how it looks nothing like the Japanese box art. So with that being the case, I actually want to take a moment to shine a light on the not often talked about European box art, because I think it's pretty great. This box art, while obviously still ridiculous looking, still captures the essence of Mega Man. This is absolutely peak 80s. I mean, just look at this Wily. He's incredible. On a financial level, Mega Man didn't really have a lot going for it. Like I said, Capcom didn't think it was going to sell in Japan, and while it did sell enough to get localized, it didn't really have any sort of press coverage or advertisements in the US. Instead, this was the game that kids talked about on the playground and on the bus. Despite all of this though, Capcom really put their faith in Mega Man, and because of that, it has spawned so many sequels, which we may or may not cover in the future. And hey, if you've made it this far in and you appreciate the fact that I've talked for what, like 5 minutes, and I haven't even gotten to what this game actually is, then do me a solid and click that little subscribe button. And I guess also hit the stupid little thumbs up like, because I want this channel to grow, and statistically that helps. If you've seen my other Javas, you know that I usually like to share some sort of personal story about how I first came across the game, assuming there is one of course. But honestly, I didn't start with Mega Man 1. According to my memory anyway, my first Mega Man game was actually Mega Man 2. I didn't even own a copy of Mega Man 1 for a very long time. How long? Well, until 2023, believe it or not. That's not to say I hadn't played it decades earlier, it's just that when I think about my childhood video game collection, Mega Man 1 wasn't a part of it. My introduction to Mega Man 1 was actually on an emulator playing the Wily Wars, which is a remake of Mega Man 1, 2, and 3 for the Sega Genesis. I know that I did eventually play it on an NES emulator as a kid as well, and of course, over the decades, I've purchased it on things like the Wii Virtual Console and of course the Mega Man Legacy Collection. It's just that I don't really have a deep history with Mega Man 1. I've played it countless times over the decades, it's just that, again, to memory, the very first Mega Man is just not one that I grew up with. So with that all out of the way, what the hell is Mega Man? As opposed to making yet another Xevious reskin, the fresh new talent that Capcom brought in made an action platformer. You take the role of the titular Mega Man, a house robot living with his sister Roll, both of whom were built by Dr. Light in the far-off future of 20XDX. In this year, robots are everywhere, made with the intention to help humans and live alongside them. Dr. Wily, an old partner and rival of Dr. Light, was jealous of Light's creations, so he stole 6 of them, being Cutman, Gutsman, Elecman, Iceman, Fireman, and Bombman, and reprogrammed them to do his bidding in an attempt to take over the world. Once this happened, Mega, the house robot, volunteered to be converted into a fighting robot to track down and take out the rogues. When the game starts, you're taken to an extremely basic screen, which looks infinitely better in Japanese. After pressing start, you'll be greeted with this. This right here is innovation number 1. This was not how games worked back in the 80s. You press start, you played the game. That's it. Press start, move right, the end. Mega Man gave us an extra step. It gave us a choice. Press start, and then what? Who are these little dudes? The funny thing is, the entire story for Mega Man is located in the manual, and even then, only the Japanese manual is actually canon. Meaning, if you were a kid in the 80s and you rented or borrowed this game from a friend and put it in, you would have no idea what was going on or what you were even looking at here. While it looks like a character select screen, it's actually a boss select screen, or stage select to be simple. You get full control over what boss to fight first, which is one of the most defining traits about Mega Man, and something I really hope they don't mess up in the 7th and 8th entries. After you pick your stage, the boss gets a little introduction, and the level starts with the words "ready" before Mega Man drops in. I think the significance of this intro is often overlooked. Everyone knows it, but people don't really think about how unique it really is. Most games, especially back then, when a level started, your character was just standing there. There wasn't any flair to be had. Meanwhile, Mega Man has this word flashing, and then he just drops in, and he's got this stance like he's just ready to go. It's awesome. And I love how something as simple as a character entrance became such a staple to the series. Anyway, you've got 3 things you can do in this game: move, jump, and shoot. That's it. If you want to get a little spicy, you can jump and shoot. It's basic, but it works. Your goal is to fight your way through stages, taking out enemies while overcoming some pretty tough platforming. You'll know you've reached the end of a stage when you see these vertical lifting gates. This is the final area before the boss, usually consisting of one last trek to get to the final gate, and it also serves as the final checkpoint for each level. Each stage culminates in a battle against the boss you selected on the initial level select screen. No matter which boss you fight first, you only have one option for beating them, and that's to use your Mega Buster. Out of these 6 bosses, there are some that are just going to be straight up harder to defeat with the Buster, but that also means that the game has some pretty great replay value, which we'll get to in a bit. Upon defeating a boss, they explode in much the same way Mega Man does when he dies. You collect the item they drop and get your points. Alright, this game's got points, by the way. They don't really serve a purpose, but I do think they're actually pretty cool to see in a game like this. They're clearly a leftover concept from Capcom's arcade days, and yeah, while ultimately they don't really add anything, they don't really detract from anything either, so I think they're pretty neat. Now you may be wondering what that item you collected was, because the game definitely doesn't tell you. This here is innovation number 2. Personally, I'm under the assumption that it's a data chip or something left over from the boss. But you see, this is where Mega Man's unique status comes into play. After defeating each Robot Master, you can open your menu with the start button and select their ability to use for yourself. All abilities have a limited amount of ammo to use, which can be replenished via drops from enemies, similar to the HP drops that you see. In 1987, this was a truly groundbreaking feature to have. As it turns out, while all bosses can be defeated with the standard Mega Buster, they all have a weakness to each other, and a design philosophy akin to rock, paper, scissors. Once you've defeated a boss, you're brought back to the level select screen to choose your next path. You can either try to guess what boss is weak to the new weapon you just acquired, or you can just continue picking at random. In regards to the stages themselves, they're alright. Considering that this is the first Mega Man game, there is nothing inherently wrong with these stages. They're just a bit bland aesthetically, but this is something Capcom would again improve upon vastly in the upcoming games. Don't get me wrong, for the year this game came out, these stages look amazing. But looking at them now, sometimes they feel like beta test rooms, areas that were made to test your abilities that aren't complete. The level design is fine, but they did have this weird issue of repeating screens from time to time. You'll be playing through a stage, and then suddenly come across a screen that is identical to one that you already passed through. There's nothing bad about this, it's just unnecessary. Maybe this was done to make the stages seem a bit longer without having to design brand new rooms. Which I guess I should have touched upon. Because while Mega Man is an action platformer, it's not the same as, say, Mario, where each stage is basically just one long room that you run through. Instead, each stage is grouped into screens of various sizes. Once you work your way through a screen, whether you exit right, top, or bottom, the camera will scroll in whatever direction you were moving in, placing you in the next screen. A lot of this was just due to the limitation of the NES hardware, which is why you might notice that as Capcom got more used to developing for the NES, the size and shape of these screens started to change pretty dramatically in the later Mega Man games. As for the music, again, it's alright. There's some truly classic hits here, but there are some songs that can be a little rough to listen to. Gutsman's and Cutman's themes are very classic. Bombman and Iceman simplistic, but fine. Elecman is quite literally Journey's Faithfully, which I've always found to be kind of hilarious, and I love that about it. But Fireman's stage is rough. It has this electronic buzz in the start that always kind of grated on me, which is a shame because just past that part, I think the song is great. But it just ruins listening to the song for long periods of time, knowing that that buzz is there. So you beat all 6 stages, now what? Well, introducing innovation number 3, the Wily Castle. No longer is the level choice up to the player, you're now streamlined into a gauntlet of 4 stages, one after another. These stages are unique in that they don't follow any sort of elemental theming like the Robot Master stages. Instead, they take enemies and design elements from the previous 6 stages and smash them all together. Here's the thing, in most Mega Man games, the Wily stages are always known to be notoriously hard, but in Mega Man 1, I never really felt like that was the case. The first Wily stage is indeed a step up in difficulty, but beyond that, Wily Stage 2, 3, and 4 are all very basic and rather short, especially 3. But that doesn't mean that this part of the game is a cakewalk, because you do have a whole slew of bosses to fight, both new and old. Which brings us to our fourth innovation, boss refights. This became a staple of just about every single Mega Man game in the future, excluding the Legends series. Even Mega Man Battle Network and Mega Man Star Force do this. Later on, they'd be more streamlined, but at Mega Man 1, starting from Wily Stage 2, some screens will have you refighting one of the 6 previous Robot Masters. They're typically easier this go around since you're guaranteed to have their weakness, but it's a cool touch. There are 2 of them found in Wily Stage 2, each encountered before the real boss of the stage, and then the final 4 are all found in Wily Stage 4, again encountered before the real boss of that stage. After fighting your way through the gauntlet of the 4 Wily stages, you eventually square up with the man himself and his final contraption. Defeating Wily brings the game to a close, and that's it. Of all the Mega Man games, 1 is probably the hardest for someone to jump into compared to the later games. That's not to say that the later Mega Man games are easy, but that design-wise, the team had a better understanding of what they were doing. Mega Man is still a fun game, but the true importance of it is what it brought to the video game industry. While Mega Man 1 certainly isn't my favorite in the series, I still think it's safe to call it a masterpiece, and it's a game that I genuinely enjoy revisiting once a year. This game was a huge step in the right direction for Capcom, and set the foundation for so many more Mega Man games to build upon. Not only that, but Capcom's own innovations made it so they were the company that were now inspiring others. Games started being made that gave players a more open-ended choice as to what level to go to next, such as Shatterhand. Even games that came out decades later like Shovel Knight and Cuphead based parts of their design philosophies on Mega Man. It was a truly revolutionary game, but unfortunately often completely overshadowed by everything that came after it. I think one of the best things about it, and of course this includes the later games, is the replayability they have. They aren't particularly long games, but you can purposefully do stages in a different order each playthrough. You could decide to do buster only runs, not using the boss weaknesses at all. Again, this was not something that other games in 1987 were doing. I find it pretty amazing that Capcom had so much faith in these developers that even though Mega Man didn't sell particularly well, they let the developers take another swing at it and make a sequel, which of course I will be covering in the future. So how do you feel about Mega Man? Have you played it? Do you ever revisit the first game? Let me know down in the comments. That being said, my name is AJ, and this was just another video about Mega Man.